Welcome to The Art of Growth. This is Jim Zartman, and today we have something different going on. There's some folks we really respect in the Enneagram world, and occasionally we get to cross paths and do things with them. And today we are sharing an interview we did with the gents over at Around the Circle. We were interviewed by Jeff, and we wanted to share the conversation we had with him because it was really incredible. He brought some things out in the discussion around the book, Hunters, Farmers, and Teamers, that we released earlier this year. And this was a great example of something we deeply believe, which is wisdom is a communally generated effort. If you do not yet have the new book, Hunters, Farmers, and Teamers, you can get that on Amazon. And I know some folks would rather not buy from there, but unfortunately, that's the only option we have right now, unless we personally mail you a signed copy of the book. And if you are interested in that, you can reach out to us to do that. You can take the new Hunter, Farmer, Teamer assessment at our website, theartofgrowth.org. And this is an absolute game changer for teams and for hiring practices. And so if you'd like us to work with your team around this, please reach out to us at theartofgrowth.org. Now, here's our conversation with Jeff.
The Enneagram is a map of the human personality. It's a tool for navigating relationships. It creates language for what motivates us and helps us look at the way we look at everything else. Most importantly, the Enneagram's a mirror because sometimes you need help seeing yourself. My name is Jeff Cook. I'm a longtime professor of philosophy in Greeley, Colorado, and I'm flying without a wingman today. But I am here. I'm here with my friends Joel Hubbard and Jim Zartman, who not only have a stellar set of Enneagram podcasts under the name Art of Growth, they have also released a new book on instincts called Hunters, Farmers, and Teamers. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Dear listener, Jim and Joel end up being, in my experience, the most informed people out there on instincts. And I'm thrilled to say that they have something in print now. I was thinking about this in Enneagram world. To my knowledge, no one's really tackled instincts with, like a 50,000 word text. You have people who are doing like kind of bite-sized stuff, but even Beatrice Chestnut's book, which so many of us reference, like if you actually get that book, it's very short in terms of the amount of time that she's spending on the instincts. And you all are doing not only the data collection, not only the 27 panels. We've mentioned this in the past, but dear listener, if you have not gotten a chance to, the fine men at The Art of Growth have 27 podcasts on each of the pairings of instincts and Enneagram type with 3 or 4 participants, and just a treasury of insight on how Enneagram and instincts overlap. So, question for you guys. Are you the most informed people on earth when it comes to the instincts?
I mean, is there such a thing? You mentioned the Beatrice Chestnut book and some of the other people who we definitely stand on the shoulders of, but I feel like so much of that stuff that we did read early on, it just whet our appetite to go, oh my goodness, there's so much more here. Like, how can we dive into this in a way? And I even feel like since the book came out, some of the conversations have been prompted. We're going, oh my gosh, it'd be so easy to add another like 50 or another 10,000 words on top of what we wrote in this. So. Right.
That has been my experience as well. And I know, and I have a buddy who's throwing a whole online Enneagram conference on instincts. I don't know if you know the great Tyler Zach, who's doing that next summer. But he said when he puts out feelers and says, what is it, Enneagram folks, that you want to learn more of? It's always instincts and subtypes end up routinely being top 1, top 2 topics. And so anyway, just it feels like I consistently think a lot of people want to say Enneagram's old. I want to say Enneagram is very new. And this is one of those places. It's like when I read your stuff, I'm like, no, this is fresh work. They're not repeating stuff. They're discovering stuff and they're elevating it with new language. And that's what I read in your book.
Yeah, it is something we're finding a lot of people out there want to know more about. And I think it's starting to stretch our understanding in a new way towards the instincts, but also it is demarking a bit more what is the difference between the Enneagram itself, or sort of the types. When we say Enneagram, we mean the Enneagram of personality. So that's the 9 personality types and their definitions. And instincts seem somehow deeply connected and also something that stands outside of that.
Yeah. So that was going to be one of my first questions because, I want to start with philosophy. When you come to instincts, do you see them as just one subgenre in Enneagram study, or are instincts a whole different model? And this is a place, when you do Enneagram work, is it an overlap of these two different spheres?
Yeah, I would say that the model itself is different from the rest of it as we're learning about it. And part of, I think, what early writers on the Enneagram did not know yet. I mean, obviously, you can't know what you're going to know 10 years into the future. But, in this case, it's more like 30 or 40 years. When the early writers began writing about the Enneagram, they weren't able to distinguish the difference between an Enneagram type and what part the instinct played. And so as we've begun to understand the instincts, we're able to start to separate out the instincts.
Right.
So we might say, type 5 is a private person. And that was sometimes how they were described as a type. Now we understand that has much more to do with the instincts than it does with the type itself. And so you find, for example, you find a hunter teamer type 5, and you have someone that doesn't relate much to the idea of privacy. And so those are the things we began to be able to separate out and understand them as two different things. However, as with all models, there are intersections between them when we're dealing with human behavior, human psychology. It seems like one model explains something a little bit better, and then another model explains something else a little bit better. And the Enneagram, has welcomed in this idea of instincts, but now we're recognizing that it is something quite big. We thought it was like adjacent to the type. Now it seems like it is at least 50% of any description we could ever give.
How would you build on that, Jim?
Yeah, I think the misconception that I'm starting to see emerge in the Enneagram world is that it's an addition on top of the Enneagram. But I think, one, like we describe in the book, this comes from a very elemental evolutionary process. These developmental processes that are in all creatures, in the human race from the dawn of time. And so I think of it sort of as like the most fundamental structure of, not of personality, but of the function that personality serves. So the desire to feel safe, to be able to navigate the environment. These are something that is very much instinctual. And then what we talk about in the Enneagram world is that people are endlessly complicated and endlessly deep. So let me build on that real quick. So I think if I was to give a structure that was the most fundamental, I would say the instincts are the most fundamental structure. And then you want to get deeper and you want to get really well informed. If you combine the instinct with the center of intelligence, oh man, you've got something really deep now. Oh, now let's take it a step deeper, the instinct and the type. And then you mentioned that we did the 27 panels. Like, okay, you take each of the types with each of those instincts, you got 27. And then one thing that we found that has radically informed us is how the stack works. Is like when we did these 27 panels, that you'd have, a panel of 4 people, and 3 of them would all seem to line up really well with each other, like be inside each other's head. And then there'd be one kind that would stand out. And then we found, oh my goodness, that person, when we asked them about their stack, their secondary instinct, so they have their dominant instinct, and their secondary instinct was different than the other 3. And so then we're multiplying again. And so people are endlessly deep and fascinating, but I think there's a way to understand the way that the structure functions that helps us get to that level of depth.
What I really took from your early work, this is a few years back when I was introduced to your work, is that you started with biology and you started with human development, especially as we are social creatures. And I suppose the way that I would want to talk about instincts is that instincts are about our social energy, and it's directed towards the group. It's directed towards an individual, or it's directed toward myself. That would be how I come to it. Is there anything worth correcting there, or or building on. But I think that is my entry point, and it always seems real helpful for me.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to need different tools to talk about this very complex subject. We're going to need different models, different approaches, because it is far deeper than any one of us understands at this point. So I appreciate that for sure. I think the idea of the instincts, which is something that is easy to get away with because we think personality so much of the time. It's like, well, personality. But as Jim said earlier, instincts really precedes personality. It's a survival mechanism that then gets taken by the personality and in some cases hijacked. I would say perhaps most of the time hijacked by the personality as a means for survival. So there are 3 survival instincts. So, the farmer, the survival instinct is, preserving. That's how we survive. We survive through preserving, through sustaining, through protecting. But then you get to so that's the farmer or self-preservation. You get to the hunter or sexual. Now it's like, that's not enough. That doesn't feel very preserving. It feels more safe to have change, to get the new thing in the system, because otherwise we're not going to have what we need. And so it pursues that. It also propagates. It's like, I want to send out my thoughts, my ideas, I want to have something like that's put out into the world that feels like a piece of me continues on. So there's this transmitting kind of energy happening there. And then the teamer or the social's thinking, well, we're going to survive better if we're together and we know our roles within that herd, that pack, the flock, as a means to then, making our way through the world safely. So each one of them is thinking about safety, survival. It's more than safety, it's survival, but thinking of it and approaching it very differently. And yet they're all within us. All 3 are within each of us, but in different, maybe percentages is a kind of a crude way of saying it, but functionally that seems to be how it works.
Sorry. And it seems like there was an aspect that did get assumed along the way when it came to a term like preservational, that it was self-preservational. And that's how the instincts have classically been discussed in the Enneagram circles. But we found that may be true at a certain point or in a developmental or an evolutionary process. But there's a point in which that energy of preservation stays the same, but it gets applied to different realms. And it might get, if someone has that secondary hunter, that might get more applied to their immediate circle. When we did the farmer episode we just did, the farmer that we had on, Serena, she was talking about like the being part of preserving the land and being part of co-creation with the environment, and that to know the environment and to be working with it as a way to preserve life. And so the realms that it got extrapolated into is really interesting, as well as like the hunter environment. Well, like what environment are you hunting in? So it's not just with one other person, but you can even hunt in more of a social environment. So there is an interplay with these things that is really interesting. And I feel like maybe we're creating the next rung on the ladder of understanding the instincts, but I still think there's a long way to go.
Yeah. Quick clarification, and this is for me, it's actually a central question when coming to the study of the Enneagram, is whether or not your personality is something to transcend, something to overcome. In some of the language being used here in terms of biology, I got the sense that you were saying that your instincts can overwhelm your will at some level. Is that how you would read the instincts? And when talking about the personality, is the personality something that you think is good and ought to be, cherished, or is it something, some folks will want to transcend their ego or, their frame at some level? How do you guys approach that?
Yeah, I don't believe in transcending the ego. I know let me back up and say I know what is meant by that by many of these people that talk about it, and I would agree with what they mean by that. But then there's plenty who take that and put it, there's a sense at which you sort of look down on the ego as it's a problem to be solved. And I don't believe that it's a problem to be solved. I think our ego has preserved us and has helped us to survive as long as it has. And it's a necessary thing. I agree with Richard Rohr that you have to have an ego before you can transcend some of the lower habits of the ego, right? So again, I'm completely with that. Yes, 100%. We don't want the ego running the show all the time. We want to grow to be able to relax the ego a little bit. But to the degree that we fight it, we actually continue to keep it alive within us. It's really a matter of gently relaxing around the ego, loving it, but recognizing its value, its purpose, but then also moving towards the higher side of the self. There's always these two sides, one that's much more concerned with our own survival and one that's concerned with the well-being of others beyond ourselves. And I think that is the tension many of us walk. So I would say that about the personality, not something necessarily to think about transcending. I think I love the fact that I'm a 7. I will never not be a 7, but my hope, because why would I? Why would I want to give up on enthusiasm? Why would I want to give up on big picture thinking? Why would I want to give up on the things that are really good about the 7? However, there's some really egoic things about the 7 that I also have to transcend. So that's also true. So that's part I would say about the personality. What's your question about the instincts? I forget.
Well, is it the case that the instincts can overwhelm your will?
Oh, okay,
and
right.
how do you think through that? That was kind of the language that I was hearing there at some level as you were saying them up biologically.
Yeah. I don't know that the instincts can, and our personality can overwhelm us. Our ego can overwhelm us at times. Willpower is a mystery in some sense, because at times we feel like we have a lot of it. At times we feel like we have very little of it. And I do think that, we want to grow to gain more agency. That's one of my deepest convictions about growth, is it's really about gaining more internal sense of agency, not necessarily external control of life circumstances, but that agency on how we respond to life, what it does to us, how we grow through it. And I think that agency is a really powerful gift that we want to grow into. And but there are days where the instinct, the survival part of the instinct, the lower part of it, because we're starting to learn now that there's this higher part of the instinct and this lower part of the instinct. So that's new. We didn't put that in the book, but we're seeing it. And the lower part can take over you, where it becomes very much about transmitting or propagating or, making that deep connection, not paying attention to the responses of people, but kind of pushing our agenda. That can show up in the, let's say, hunter or sexual instinct. The preserving or self-preserving or the farmer instinct can sort of pull back and withdraw and, think about its own self and its own needs and its own resources, its own well-being. And so we'll do that. Teamers can also fade back. People might think teamers, they do. They fade back in terms of, I just want to participate, but I don't want to really contribute or I don't want to contribute at a higher level. I just want to sort of sneak in there, just kind of be part of the system. And so you can start to see these kinds of things happening, and you could feel overwhelmed by that need, the survival need of the instinct. So I think at that point, your will doesn't feel you don't feel like you've got much willpower.
There's also the aspect of when it comes to true growth, there is this dance that I think is incredibly important. And I typically see people fall off one of two sides, which is they see something. They come to an awareness where they see something within them. And then they see it either as, do I accept or reject this? Right? So I put it in this binary. I either have to be totally fine with this and say, oh, this is just the way I am, or I have to fix it. It's a problem to be solved. And I think this is, again, this is a bit of what Joel's saying, but I think there's an aspect, as a type 8, I want to relax my need to control. I need to relax that part of it and have a little bit more peace around it. But I want to also strengthen the part of me that wants to empower others. there's this thing where I see in the Enneagram all the time, people, they learn their type and they're like, well, that's just the way I am. And I need you now to accept me, or you need to be okay with me, or this is just who I am. And there's the acceptance is in place, but not the transformation. And I see other people fall off the other extreme, where they see the negative aspects of the type and they see themselves as a problem to be solved. And so they want to, whatever language they choose, but I need to fix myself. I need to change myself. I need to alter this thing about myself, right? And then you've put yourself at a civil war internally. And I don't think a civil war is the solution. And I don't like it when I see people doing that to themselves, because they're just, creating more destruction. And as Joel said before, often they end up trying to use the type to fix the type. And I think that what we want to advocate for, if we're talking about actual transformational growth, is we want to see this as information, our instincts. This is a huge part that's a instinctual response. So it's pre-thought. So it can't hijack because it's pre-thought. It's instantaneous. We want to observe it. We want to learn to see it. And we also want to do the same with our type. We want to see the information, but we don't want to make it either, oh, I'm totally fine, or I have to somehow go to war with myself. Because then we don't change when we aren't being gentle around that process.
That's a good answer. The thing as you're speaking, I wanted to pull back and talk about what you had said earlier about just the overlap of instincts in the center or instincts and type. Your book ends up really highlighting the instincts. And in fact, I'm trying to remember if there's much Enneagram type discussion at all. Perfect.
The word Enneagram appears twice in the entire book.
Bing. As I'm hearing you speak, so again, I come to instincts and think of them as social energy. Joel, as you were speaking, you had referenced how much they do still influence motive. And I think both of you seem to be pushing into that space of these are so depthy that they're just inextractable from how you are not only filtering the world, but engaging the world. That strikes me as just bedrock of what it means to be a person. And yes. Is that where you would place it's yes. Not just how you're engaging the world socially, sexually, self-protectively, but they're influencing the very things that you want.
Oh, yeah. Oh, very much. Yeah, that's the point at which it's hard to, what we did was, as a teacher, this, you have to create extracts. You have to pull it out of its natural complex environment in order to see it. Mm-hmm. But then you have to put it back in its complex environment because it can't live outside of that. It's not real outside of that. That's so awesome. We did that with the instincts, so this is this is what it appears like. But you'll have people who are like, well, I don't do all of those things, or I don't show up exactly like that. Well, no, of course not, right? Because you have a personality type, and so what it does with the instinct and what the instinct does, and I really think, it seems like the instinct does something to the personality, and the personality does something to the instinct, and so what you end up having is this expression, which will look very different from type to type, and even if you have the same exact instinctual stacking and the same type, even the interests that you might have will be different. And so there's still, it doesn't answer everything, but at least it starts to kind of identify some new things that we're learning about personality.
It's good.
And we try to put it in the realm that we see it in, as far as a lot of this book, we're talking about the realm of people trying to do something together. So we naturally talk about work environments, community environments, but whenever people are trying to build something to make sense of the world around them, to interact with it and accomplish something, and that they're advocating for these different value systems as they go through it. So you have when we say hunters, farmers, teamers, a lot of companies are started by hunters, right? That sexual instinct. I'm searching for the new. I don't want to stay in the immediate environment because I don't know it will provide what we need. We need to go over the next hill to hunt for woolly mammoth because there's probably more resources external to the immediate environment. And often those people are in conflict with the hunter types who are like, well, how do we preserve and sustain our current environment, work with the land and the seasons? And if we utilize the resources at hand, if we just function with what is in front of us and we manage it really well, we'll have what we need to survive. We'll have what we need. And then there's others who are like the teamers who are going, well, you're both right. We need to work together. And if we team up with this other tribe over here, we're probably going to be a lot more sustainable. And if we scale the amount of people involved and the resources that can be shared, then we're going to have that stability and scalability and success over time. We're going to find new resources. We're going to preserve the ones we have. We're going to have this all working together. And so we were trying to take, what do you take when you take these elemental instinctual things that, yes, are part of who we are as individuals, but you put them on the grander scale of people trying to accomplish something together and how they are working together and what they're each advocating for. What kind of conflicts come up when you have these kind of diverse issues? That's what we're trying to solve here, because that's what we're saying is the instincts are so fundamental to literally the way we do everything. And yes, the nuance of the personalities show up within the farmer community, but it's still there.
Right. Dear listener, I jump into the philosopher that I am, but most of this book is about organizational structures and specifically the chemistry between types. I love me some typology in terms of Enneagram and the rest. The places that Enneagram has helped me the most is here. It's not just my personality type, but it's the type of the person in front of me who I love and
100%.
Yet don't understand. This ends up being a real value of this book, especially in work environments. This, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, this is built to be read by those who really care about their team. They're building something, they're in an organization, and they're wanting to get on the same page and do something amazing together. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was the context that we put the book in because we're working in a lot of those environments. But like, I don't know, the whole line between the professional and the personal is dissolving more and more. Like people are bringing their whole selves to work.
Yeah.
And I think something that shows up in one place, it shows up everywhere. So you could say working on a team, but a marriage is a team. Like a family is functioning as a team. These instincts certainly show up in what that team is trying to accomplish. So yes, we put it in a lot of the contemporary work languages. Part of it is because I see the instincts as a foundation that is more beneficial than a lot of the other systems that are out there. Predictive Index, DISC, Myers-Briggs, Hogan, Insights. I see these as a lot of the things that a team goes to first because it's some simple 4-part system. And they look at something as the Enneagram as being a really heavy lift. And you can go, no, let's start with the instincts. You're going to be really solid. And when you're ready to go up a level, then we introduce the Enneagram and we're just going to be able to build. And so like my mega goal, like as far as like international business use, I want people to start here and then be able to build on it from there.
Right.
So it's the context of the book because you have to put it in a context, but it's also universal.
Yeah. There's so much you learn from just even when you know the instincts of how to interact with people. So there's all sorts of things around, stances, Enneagram stances. That we've discovered by instinctual stacking does affect how people show up, whether they're going to be more against or at, or more toward or dutiful, or more away and withdrawn. And even the ones that are classically called, oh yeah, you're a 9 or you're a 5, so that would mean you're in the withdrawn stance. Well, have you ever met a social sexual 9? They don't appear very withdrawn. In fact, they appear constantly to be toward. But they recognize the withdrawing energy inside themselves. Very aware of it. Very aware of it. Mm-hmm. But they also feel like the instincts push them out. And that's been language so helpful to them to understand, why do I have this push-pull effect internally? Why is it that on one hand I want to do this, on the other hand there's this other part of me that doesn't? And so you see the stances that way, which then means that when you're interacting with people anywhere, you can start to pick up on instincts. You can start to feel a more withdrawn, someone pulling back, maybe a little bit of self-preservation going on there. Maybe it's the farmer inside them. And so if I'm going to hang out with people, I'm kind of tuning into both of those things. Stances, yeah, but also instincts to see what's happening. So I'll give you an example. I show up at the gym recently, and my buddy says to me, hey, we play racquetball with a bunch of guys. He says, hey, where'd you get that glove? And I says, oh, I purchased it on Amazon. And his immediate, without thought response was, why didn't you get it from Jimmy? Jimmy buys all the stuff at a discount through this organization, and it affects all of us. We all get better results from that. You get cheaper products and all that. It was instantaneous, no thought from him. And it was very obvious to me, confirmed a lot of suspicions I had. He's got a strong social teamer instinct. And for him, what I did was very selfish, because he's told me about this before. I just forgot. And he's told me this several times, and I forgot several times. And so you can see that sort of like, oh, I see why it rubbed him the wrong way. Like for me, it's like, who cares? It's one little thing. I'm sure it didn't affect the price that much, but it's this idea. So I immediately turned and said, you're right. Next time I will make sure that I do that. That's a very good point. Thank you. And so it teaches us to how to interact and recognize these instincts. And I'll tell you, organizations, when we've done this, literally it takes us 10 to 15 minutes to explain hunters, farmers, teamers. And they instantly begin to see, oh, that explains why that person's the way they are or what they're doing. That makes so much sense. Or why, when we promoted this individual, they didn't really thrive as a manager. Whereas prior to that point, they were doing really good at project managing, or at working on a particular, in a particular way prior to that point. But as soon as they got people that they started managing, they struggled. So you start to immediately see the applications and the uses of this. So yes, family, friends, and definitely corporate.
Love that. I'd love to get into some of the meat here. Again, philosopher that I am, I love changing language. And so I thought it risky.
You're one of the few.
And I thought it was, I missed what you said. I apologize.
I said you're one of the few, because so many people have an immediate reaction against anything you start using different language.
Well, sexual type that I am. I mean, I'm
there we go. All right.
a risk taker on these fronts.
That's right.
I think one of the most helpful things on the Enneagram front is to bail the titles sometimes, a helper, perfectionist, etc. However, those can be really helpful. Putting language to things, especially big concepts like this, we've kind of mentioned this already. We are talking about huge categories in terms of sexual, self-preserving, and social types. And as was said, like sometimes the small descriptions aren't really going to connect with you, but some of them will. I love the image. Again, it brings in the biology, but of hunter, farmer, teamer, in terms of here is a filter through which you can get into this material that's different. Like just allow your mind to get into the material in a different kind of way so that we can say some new and interesting things. Because too often you're on your railroad track and you can't move because the language is causing you not to move.
That's right.
But fresh language, one of the things fresh language does, if you allow it, is it allows you to open up your mind a little bit. When I come to your work, this is what I experience most, is that I saw characteristics of each of these three instinctual variants, dominant variants, as in new ways. And I want to just talk about that, like in your own discovery. And you start with hunters, so I'd love to start with hunters. What was the newest, freshest thing that you learned about sexually dominant hunters that you weren't looking at before, but it just materialized as you got into looking at that variant?
Yeah. Where do we begin? But yeah, there's been so much that we have learned. Even, we've always known, since we learned about the instincts, that there are sort of three subcategories under each of the instincts, and those are obvious. Like change, yes, hunters like change. Hunters like to immerse themselves. Just drop me in. Like, don't tell me about it. Drop me in. I want to experience it. That's how I learn. I learn from the inside. But I also like to immerse myself, even relationally or, with other people, in really deep connections and deep conversations. And then the third was broadcasting, putting myself out there, So all those are familiar. Like, oh yeah, we see that. But there's been certain things that have been surprising, like competition, like how much the hunter competes and doesn't compete, which is interesting. Because I talked to some hunter types who's like, oh no, I don't compete anymore. I don't compete. I'm like, well, is that because it's so painful to lose? It's like, yes. Like it is something that is really hard, and I hate it so much that I've stopped competing entirely. Like I don't want to have I don't want that feeling, right? And at the same time, there's something really wonderful about that experience of pushing yourself. It's definitely that energy that pushes you beyond your capacities. So there was a lot of that. The other one was the ability to transmit and receive, because that's a part of it that sexual hunter types like to put something out there. And but if they're not paying attention to it, they can be doing that too much and not also receiving, taking in, and really processing that well. So the dance between those two, because I also am coaching one who's mostly receptive, doesn't transmit very much, which surprised me. But that's been helpful for me to understand what's going on for you, that you are a dominant hunter, but you have a hard time transmitting. And it's like, well, actually, I really do enjoy the receptivity. I love that. And so it's been exercising a little bit more self-disclosure. It's one of the things that hunters do fairly easily, is to self-disclose, to be a little bit more transparent, to reveal what's going on internally. So those have been a few things that, have been some interesting new ideas that we're learning about the types or about the instinct.
Did anything hit you, Jim?
Well, I was immediately going on to the farmer so we could hit a few of them, which was so much of the language that had existed. And I loved how you said that about how language has to change or we get stuck in these ruts. Like that's so helpful. That's a really good articulation of it that I hadn't heard yet. And I really, really appreciated. So the thing about like the farmer is so much of the language had to do with the self when it came to that preservation instinct. And so a huge part was like, well, how do we say this when this instinct goes to work? It doesn't suddenly become something else. It's not like their instinct disappears and they suddenly become all their type or a different instinct. So what is that person like when put into team environments, group environments, and this kinds of environments? And how does that show up? And the fact that they still apply the same resource management and desire for wellness, desire for stability, that these things still show up in every realm that they apply themselves to. So it's not just self. And so I think when it comes to each of the instincts, it's like, well, why we need different language often is like, well, does that language still work when you're showing up in a different realm? Which is why like the sexual didn't really work, or the one-to-one, because it's not really about one-to-one. Like, how does that get applied in these environments? Because again, we're talking about an instinctual evolutionary energy that is guiding this, that is behind the scenes. And so how do we talk about that in fresh ways? And some of the stuff about the teamers, I think that that social instinct is one of the main things I didn't like about the term social is people thought, oh, that meant these are social people, that they like being around other people. And that we were trying to point out, no, it's a preoccupation, an attention, and a sense of responsibility to the social realm, not a interest or desire to be social. You can be introverted or extroverted and be a social type because it's a realm of concern. It's a realm of I need to pay attention to this. And so there's a desire to be a part of something bigger than yourself, even if that means serving behind the scenes for something that was considered a dominant type, and so I think some of this language is very much designed in order to deal with some of the shortcomings of the previous language.
Mm-hmm.
Let me add a couple things, one to the preserving or farmer and one to the teamer. One of the surprises too was the nature of participation with the preserving or the farming instinct, different from collaboration. That's more of a social or teamer instinct gift, but it is a fascinating thing to watch, and something that's really got my attention, and I want to learn more about is the nature of participation when it comes to farmer types. because they don't seem to fight nearly as much as I do with the physical realm. There's not a trying to, wrestle it or wrangle it into control. There's more of a dialogue. It's like a conversation they're having with it. Now, I'm speaking about it at the higher level. At the lower level, that's not always how it's going to show up. But at the higher level, you watch this participation, this back and forth, this dialogue, I've even watched them literally speak to mechanical objects and refer to them even as by name, giving them a name, which I've never understood that, but naming their car or it's like there's definitely more of a relational participation feel to that. So that's that on the preserving farming, self-preserving farming instinct. And then on the teamer instinct, it's that many teamers do not take charge and do not take roles of leadership. That was a surprise to me, because that's something that's fairly natural to them. And yet many of them say, I don't clamor for power or control. It's not something I've not chased it. It's not something I'm trying to get a hold of. And many of them, it's because of this sense that they recognize the responsibility that's involved in doing something like that. And they're more interested in, how do I collaborate? How do I enter in and serve the group? If it means leading, I'll lead, but it's not necessarily I have to lead. Now, again, this is minusing narcissism or ego. It's tremendous people with strong egos. But minus that, these people tend to look at how can I participate? In what way can I serve the whole? Like, what is my role here? And so I think that's an intriguing thing about them, and also the sense of responsibility they carry. That's also something I haven't heard much talk about. But I've asked social teamer types, do you feel responsible for the team? Even if you're not in charge, do you carry some measure of responsibility? And the answer has been so far, yes. Now we still have to field test it with many more personality types, but that's been so far the resounding yes.
I would love to tell you what hit me in terms of engaging your work, and comment as you will, but as just to circle back to the sexual hunter types, I think it is the branding of it up front was, this is one-on-one bonding. And so my funnel for coming to that was, I know exactly what it's like to pin somebody in the corner and have a conversation with them for 3 hours. And that's how I roll. Never had risk taking on my mental, category of myself. I would put risk taking much more in line with my oneness. And yet engaging your work, that's what's really come out for me in terms of my own self-understanding, is just how much the risk-taking side is a part of how I navigate the world, how I navigate relationships. And so that was the freshest insight for me. I don't know if it sounded like that was something you guys came into this knowing that, that the hunter sexual types generally had that disposition. Is that true? Or was that something that you came to?
Well, it was already in some of the descriptions that came out of the Enneagram Institute and other places as well, where risk was definitely one of the top categories. So there's 3 categories again. First one was risk, second one was immersion, the third one was broadcasting. So that's pretty consistent. But one of the things that we've been teasing out is just in what ways risk shows up. It's very different, and it's not always. And the thing that people really recoil against is risk. That's the funny thing. It's like, it's like, oh no, I don't see myself as a risky person. And then when I say, yes, but how much change do you need? And they're like, oh yeah, no, I'm always seeking change. And then when we talk about the changes that they've made, well, how come they didn't feel risky? It's like, well, because for me, the risk of staying the same was greater than the risk of change. Mm-hmm. And that shows up not just once a year, not just once every 6 months. That is something that shows up fairly regularly, and it's imperceptible to them. But other people experience them as very much those types that are pushing the envelope, risking in different ways. Even the fact that sexual hunter types are a bit more self-disclosing, like they will say something about themselves, feels risky to other people. Like, wow, we just met. And, you're already telling me some deep, dark secret, what feels to them as deep, dark secrets, which to the hunter, it's like, well, I haven't told you anything deep it's just, that's natural for them. So I think that part has been needed to be explained a little bit more as to what that looks like when it's being expressed, as opposed to, I'm the person that jumps out of planes at 15,000 feet. I love doing that. And I do that every day. And it's like, that's not, to me, I actually think those are not hunters. I think those are farmers who are trying to overcome their fears.
It's a counterphobic sixes going on there.
Counterphobic sixes, exactly.
Yeah, the image that I have there is of a lot of comedians tend to that's risky. I'm going to get on stage by myself and talk, and that sexual energy and that often what you see with those sorts of folks is the exposing side of this is who I am, and I suppose that was what was going through my head there to recount something just to bring it into our language that I really loved in your early presentations was to have temperatures associated with the 3 and the hotness that comes out with the hunter sexual types. It just has been very helpful for me in terms of this is who this sort of person is. This person with this kind of social energy come across hot. And that was just incredibly helpful. The thing with farmers and self-pres is I intuitively think, well, this person is selfish, but in your literature, just elevating, no, this person is resource focused and conscious first ended up being really helpful. It gave me a lot of empathy. It gave me a lot of insight in terms of where I pivot to this space at times. And that was the thing that jumped out to me as most interesting. If you guys got thoughts on that.
Well, it's just that what you're saying is you're highlighting the fact that we all have all of these. Right. So many times when we look at a system like this, we kind of go, well, where am I? Like, what am I more like? And you just pointed out a really important thing where all of us have felt these deeply at different times. All of us have felt like the world feels unstable or unsafe. And I need some more stability. I need some more groundedness and more rootedness. I need something to be familiar so that I feel like I'm on stable ground. That farmer instinct, that we've all had times where the world is so disrupted that we feel the need for that. We've also felt like, things are a little stale right now. It's just everything is kind of predictable. I don't really feel like alive. I feel like I need an adventure. I need something new in my life. I need to have that sense that I'm really here and experiencing something, that hunter sense. Like we've all experienced that at times. And we've all had this experience at times where we go, I really do want to be part of something bigger than myself. I feel like I've been locked in too small of a world. And I want to know that there is a wider world. I want to feel like that sense of meaning and purpose on a grander scale. I want to feel like I'm participating in something that matters to the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. And we all have all of these instincts within us. Like I remember early on hearing Russ Hudson talking about the types this way. And he would talk about the type and he'd say, this is the part of us that ... And I think that's a really helpful way to think about the instincts too, especially when we talk about like harmonizing them. I'm a big fan of the term harmony over balance. I think it's partly because I'm a musician, but partly it's just kind of this I use in the book this image of a chord structure. Mm-hmm. Like you still have a root note, which is your dominant instinct, but the others fill out the harmony and they make the chord more beautiful, mm-hmm. which is why we just did an episode where I talk about the most transformational thing for me in the instincts was realizing what my lowest one was and trying to develop a base level of competency in it. And that has been one of the most stabilizing factors in my life, where it actually, mm-hmm. it didn't take away from who I naturally was, it added to it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what growth does. It doesn't diminish who you naturally are. It actually allows you to thrive in your light all the more.
Love that. I think that's a great way to think about that. And I resonate as a musician myself. I resonate strongly with that. And this was one of the challenges from our last podcast was talking about how do we think about moderation and balance. And I do think that the image of it's a unity in diversity kind of image going on here. You want diversity for the sake of the strength. A diverse community really can be very powerful, and yet the unity can't be let's make everything the same. What I hear in your language, and especially hear it on the 8 side from you, Jim, is that you don't want to diminish your strength in these areas. That would actually be taking away from your power in the world, which I actually really resonate with. And what you want to do, build up your muscles, pal, on these other fronts, and allow that cord to come forth. I think that's really helpful. To pivot back to farmers, and this is building on, I love the distinction you made between collaboration and the nature of participation. Is it not the case that for farmers, one of the things that is part of their self-protective inventory is the team itself? That is that when investing in other people, this is actually a self-protective move at some level. That's what I heard in your language, that it's not just I'm isolated, I'm an introvert, but it can be the case that you have some extroverted, self-protective, self-pres farmers.
Yep.
And the investment is, here's my team.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a really good point, because we are not single instinct people, even though we know that. We still talk about, in many forums, the instincts as like, well, I'm a farmer who enjoys being part of a team. Right. Likely, you're a farmer with the teamer instinct as your second. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so what happens is the outlet then becomes the teamer for the farmer. The farmer actually looks at the team as a resource. And it's like these are people that can be part of the resourcing, part of the, helping us to sustain what it is that we're creating in the physical world. And so that's very normal for us to observe that. Whereas you'll see something very different when you have a farmer whose second is hunter, in which case then their circle is going to be very tiny. Well, they're still going to look to that as part of their, resource, the people that are immediately around them. But there's less of an intuition around how teams function and how to use that resourcing gift in and through teams. And so that's what you start to see is like, that's the distinction you pick up on when you start to recognize two of the same instinct, even the same type, but their intuitions are a bit different.
I suppose in my mind, as I'm coming to this material, I consistently kind of envision a funnel, and the self-pres farmer ends up being the most helpful for me in that they take in the world. And what is funneled, the funneling process ends up being a primary question of, do I have what I need? And that's going to influence so much. And then it's going to pivot. And as you were saying, it's going to pivot to the individual if they have a secondary center that is a sexual secondary instinct, or toward the team if that's their second. Whereas the way I experience the world ends up being the world's coming at me, and I think first and foremost about either the person in front of me or specifically about my spouse. And that's just a primary filter. And then I move towards, and am I also okay? And my social is the third. So it's, again, the funneling of the energy such that when I come to the world, this is how I'm naturally navigating. I'm real comfortable in that space too, of saying, look, if she's on board, I'm fine. But that's really the thing that goes first and foremost. If she's on board and I'm on board, like we're going to be great. And then I move towards everybody. I move towards myself, and I move towards everybody else. She is not like that. So my wife is social, dominant.
Okay. Wow,
and
big difference.
So she's taking in the world. It's always about everybody. It's about her department. It's about her family. It's about our church community. And that's the context. If we're okay, I'm good. And then she pivots towards more of that self-preservation space. But anyway, last word on these three divisions, and then I got other questions for you.
Yeah, very good.
We never talk about politics on our podcast for the most part. And as I'm reading your stuff, it's just all over, I think, how often we come to approach these topics. And so I'm saying it in order to set it aside, that there are some people who are more individualists who are risk takers, and they seem to congeal over here. And there are some people who are teamers, and they're much more, here's the group. We need to look out for everybody and understand everybody. And the individualism, and this goes back to Plato and Aristotle in terms of, the many and the one. But in terms of political power in a land like ours that is really in pain, I don't know if you've noticed this, this seems to be a primary of what is actually at war in my mind and heart is the me versus the many, kind of way of coming to being a people. And obviously your book is on the collective. So I was hoping that you might have some thoughts on that.
Yeah. Oh man. I can't believe you saying these things, because I've been really thinking a lot about this as of late myself in terms of the instincts in politics, and seeing some very similar things probably that you're saying. And maybe offline, I would love to learn a little bit more with you about this.
Right.
It's just fascinating to me, because I do think I see it. It's like, wow, it's like that no concept of the social. I can see why you think it's just individual responsibility and personal responsibility. I get that. 100% get that. I believe in that. All with you. And in fact, I really push that in many regards. But on the other hand, to miss the fact that there are social dynamics at play. Well, social types or teamer types see it. And it's a mystery to them. And I think this is what's happening in the debates sometimes, the arguments. It's just that you're missing entirely because you're seeing something that the other is not seeing at all.
Yep.
And I do think that there are blind spots. Especially if it's your third, it'll be a blind spot for you. If it's your second, less so. But that's something that I'm noticing very much about I was just thinking about the one of the many. I've been reading Plato right now. It's so fascinating to me how that is something that is still a struggle for us as humans. And my hope is that talking about the instincts can really help us to open up our eyes and even learn the language of the different instincts, so that way you can recognize them as foreign languages to you, because that's what it is at first. But then you start to become familiar. So I'm tracking with you in terms of language. It's such a massive help. So if you can learn the phrases, the sort of sayings, the concepts of each of the instincts, you can access them a little bit more inside yourself. It's not like it's not there. It's just not as developed. And then you can start to respect and value even them outside of yourself. But yeah, that's a big, big, big topic. That is, we're seeing it too.
And you're talking about language too, right? So language creates culture, and there are words that people tend to prop up, and they value this word. Like, I really value this word of freedom. Well, I really value this word of equality. And so much of the tension between the one and the many is this tension between the freedom and equality. It's the individual and the collective, like so much of this stuff. Because, and why do things get so tense so quickly? Because it's pre-thought, because it's instinctual. Like, this is such a fundamental way of how societies structure themselves too, is these advocating for the different instinctual frameworks. And we all tend to moralize our perspective and pathologize the perspective of the other. Like, this is how we work. It can create really beautiful debates because there is a pacing that makes sense. Everything is always moving too slow for the hunters and too fast for the farmers. And so the teamers are caught in between trying to navigate this thing. Like, how do we create this movement? Because we do still have to move through the world and we have to navigate this, but we're having to navigate these individual freedoms, liberty, individuality, and the collective and the societal and the systemic. Like, whenever I hear these debates, half the time I'm going, oh my goodness, you're literally just missing the other half of the equation. Or I'm going, yep, that's right. Yep. And that's right. But I'm also going like, and that's crazy. And that's crazy. Because this is what people in our world, like, I think of people that are the Enneagram world, that are in this world. We're in the wisdom industry, and we talk about things through a non-binary lens, through a three-centered lens, through a three-instincts lens. And when we come to this impasse, we have to go, well, what's the secret option number 3? Because if we integrate that into it, we can probably pull ourselves out of this destructive binary and actually get somewhere.
Right.
Let me get off my high horse now.
I think that's very well said. Speaking of Plato, if you're at war with yourself, this is going to be a self-destructive posture, and elevating elements of ourselves at cost to the others. This would be, for those of you who want to get into this, I mean, and Aristotle's going to. This is why Aristotle's going to champion a lot of the push towards moderation, is for exactly that reason. Just to say it to set it aside, one of the reasons our body politic feels like it's in pain strikes me as exactly this, is that there's a value. It's a really important value that gets elevated at the cost of other necessary values. And if you routinely are pushing the same button over and over again, and I'm sure there's something in the human brain that, like, when I turn on this cable news channel and the button gets pushed, I'm like, oh yeah, there's my value. That's the value that's primary for me. And it sucks you in, and you give your individual power to that, to that button. This is not a good way to be in the world individually or as a whole. And one of the many reasons why the book is valuable, aside from, actually pushing through this. What's the solution here? Say it's the case that you're in a team, you're making collective decisions. You have, three different people with three different, not necessarily opposed values, but they certainly, are going to have different priorities. And so how do you navigate the tension between competing values on these fronts?
Yep. Well, that's what's happening right now in our country, as we've said. It's the survival instinct. What happens when you feel threatened? Mm. When you feel threatened, the dominant instinct is what comes up real strong in you. And then you become blind to that tertiary one. In fact, you can become blind to the second one, your second as well. And you can be so pushing the first one. And then other people on the team, other people in the country are also having their own, survival fears, their concerns. So the survival instinct kicks up. And for them, it might be sustainability. In some cases, they are, in fact, very opposed. So it's not, sometimes it's just different, but sometimes they're very opposed. So, one leader will say, we need to innovate. That's the solution to every problem. We need to innovate, right? And others are saying, no, we need to sustain. We need to conserve. We're pushing too much. We're bleeding out too much money. And so there'll be a pulling back energy that happens there. So you can see these competing energies. We can't let go of these people. We need to keep them because they're all part of the system and we need to take care of. Yeah, but these people are not helping us. And so we need to let them go. So you're starting to have this thing happen. And I think the first thing we need to become aware of is we are being messed with. And I think that is how we experience what's happening in the world of politics right now. We're all being activated. We're all being triggered. And if we can take a step back, take a big deep breath, and recognize that's what's happening. So individually, I think that's where we have to pay attention to how we individually are being triggered, how we're reacting, self-awareness. What am I doing right now? Oh, I can see I'm starting to push the sustaining instinct a little too much now. So it's like, no, we're not doing anything. Stop everything. Or, hey, we need change, or, hey, we just need to have more connections and sustain ourselves through all these connections. And we just need to, keep all these people together. Whatever's happening is to be aware that that's what's going on for you. And then the second thing is then if you can, to really take a deep breath and listen to the other instincts and learn the language of the other instincts so that you can recognize that, in fact, we're better if we are a three-part, harmony. If we're a three-part chord, we're going to sound better, we're going to work better together, and we're actually going to get through this together because the three instincts are necessary and have helped us to survive as a species for as long as we have, but they can also help us to thrive. And I think that's what's missing right now, is that we're not thinking about thriving too much. We're thinking about surviving. And the shift mentally is a very, very, very big and very difficult one, but it's also necessary if we're going to really make it, is we're going to have to bring the three instincts together more.
Yeah, bring up Aristotle again, and human flourishing. Probably you need to transcend just survival.
Yes, that's right. Human flourishing. Very well said. Yeah.
Love the image of self-awareness as a road forward, and developing learning language for that invites empathy is something that seems severely lacking at times, especially as you're saying, when you feel like your survival is on the line, that can be difficult.
Yeah, it is. When you talk about survival being on the line, I think that's so much of what activates people. And you mentioned that we wrote this book primarily towards like companies, and a company is like a miniature nation in a lot of ways. And one of the things that's even sparked since the book came out is I've been talking to more people about like what happened at that company, that it lost its influence, it lost its position in the market, it lost its dominance. And I tell the stories in the books of like Blockbuster and BlackBerry. And then a friend of mine was recently telling me about Nokia, because in like 2007, they dominated the cell phone market. Like 49% of the cell phone market was Nokia. And I'm like, I don't even remember last time I heard that name. And he was telling me about how like internally the teams were pitted against each other to come up with the technology that they would use. And then that team would win. And so there was so much of that hunter instinct in the team. And so I've been looking at more and more teams and like companies that fell apart, like what happened. And you can almost identify which was the instinct that was missing,
right?
That was underutilized. And that's the one that brought down the company. And you can, I mean, there's companies that went under because there wasn't enough of the farming. There wasn't enough stability. They just go. And they ran themselves in the ground. There was some that were so stable, they had no looking into the wider market, and they went under. There was some that had those, but they had no group cohesion, and so they became so siloed that they fell apart.
Right.
So you see it in nations, and you see it in companies where, oh my goodness, they were the superpower.
Yep.
They were the standard, and now they're nothing, because they neglected one of the three.
Yeah.
And you can always spot which of the three was missing when you read their story.
Love that. And again, you had mentioned it earlier, but there is like the governing virtue on all these fronts is something like wisdom. Wisdom doesn't choose, self-preservation all the time. It doesn't choose the sexual instinct all the time. Wisdom understands reality and navigates according to the dictates of wisdom, I suppose. What would that be?
Well, wisdom always knows it's wrong sometime, or it always is aware that I'm not right about everything.
Yeah.
That I actually heard a teacher I really respect say, he got up in front of a class and he said, it was like the beginning of the year. He says, 1/3 of what I will teach you this year are wrong. I just don't know which third it is, or I would stop. And I think I've always taken that as like what wisdom says is 1/3 of anything in my view at any given point in time is definitely wrong. I just don't know which third it is. So we proceed and we include each other. Because I think that's what wisdom does. A lack of wisdom says, I am right, I know the way. I am absolutely the one who knows. Wisdom says, I absolutely know that I have something. I'm onto something here and here. I don't know everything. And this is not going to be able to be figured out by one person who says they know.
Right. Bang.
Well, that's what fools say.
That's right. We've brought up moderation and wisdom. A third of Plato's virtues, I suppose, is courage, which is going to, putting into practice the demands of wisdom will need to require some energy there as well. When those three are working in unison, then you have something that's good. That's the image for Plato. You need these three working in concert, harmony, dare we say? And I love that. I would love to elevate an extreme example and just get like, how would you process this, especially when thinking about the business world? Famous example 20 years ago is that Steve Jobs took his most successful product and reduced it to a little square on his new product. He took the iPod, which was a fantastic achievement, revolutionizes the music industry, as well as much of the tech industry, and like all of a sudden the Walkman's is obsolete. And he took that groundbreaking invention and made it an app on something else, literally burning down, doing what Nokia apparently didn't do, and elevating a phone. How do you, when you hear a story like that or think through it, what goes through your mind in terms of the dynamics of teams, people making decisions, and how that played out?
Well, that's a big one when it comes to falling in love with something and not wanting to let it go. And I think that speaks to human nature in general, that when we have created something, there's a sort of sunk cost bias that happens. There's just other biases as well. We want to hold on to it. And it really takes quite a bit of that innovation or the hunter instinct to push through that and recognize that needs to change. You need to let it go. And I think that's harder definitely for some types to do so. But it's also that you have to do that with wisdom, right? Because it's is this the right time? Am I listening well to what others are saying and still leading with this is the direction we need to go in? Mm-hmm. Because also they didn't sink the company. They didn't end up over leveraging themselves. They managed to do so, and apparently fiscally smart. And so I think I just see that the instincts were properly balanced, it seems to me anyways, in the approach to making some of these decisions. I'm not a fan of believing that you should have 33.3% of all the instincts always having every part, making every decision together in those measures, by the way. It's like, did you take 33.3% of my suggestion? It's like at some point you have to recognize which instinct needs to be the one active in this space, even if it isn't yours. Like, especially for those who are leading teams, it's like you might think this is not comfortable to me, but this seems to be the wise decision. We need to move in this direction, and you need to champion that. I think, and that's where I see the ability to be nimble, to flex, to recognize maybe I'm stuck, maybe I'm too in love with what I've created. This change is too difficult for me, and I realize that right now. So, all right, how can I shift? And wisdom would guide me to maybe champion a different instinct right now that needs to be leading the organization.
I suppose there's opposite examples of, like obviously the pivot toward the phone for Apple ended up being a huge game changer for that company. It became the biggest company in the world, or most valuable market share wise in the world for a season there. There are other obvious examples I suppose we could list in terms of companies not being able to say, look, this isn't working anymore. There's an enormous Kodak factory in my town that has been a ghost town for 20 years, in part because of the innovations of cell phones. And they weren't able to pivot off of film and really embrace something digital. And as was said, nimble, wisdom, how do you meet the moment? All of this ends up being, you have a chapter called When Instincts Collide. It struck me that's where the energy is. It's like, okay, the world is happening. And is the play right now, the self-preserving play, is the play right now, the aggressive risk-taking play is the play right now. Let's look at each other first. How do you find the voice of wisdom when your instincts are colliding?
It's not easy. Oh man, it's not easy. A lot of
difficulty and tears.
Oh, it happens all the time. I think about this with my relationship with my wife. I think about this, and in what I'm observing in the world around me and what's going on. It's tough because you are thinking about you're convinced in the moment that this is what's going to work best, for ourselves, for the world around us. So I think it again goes back to what we were saying earlier. It's a practice of listening to the instincts within yourself, like developing a better relationship to all three, and then developing a relationship with other people around those instincts, really listening well. And then I think, what is coming up for me as I'm listening to this person, I think, Jim and I have talked about this before. There's not much listening going on anywhere right now. And there's a lot of hearing to respond or to sometimes just to dismiss, but there's not real listening, which means I'm coming alongside to understand what you're saying to the degree that even I can see it. I can see how you are experiencing what you're experiencing and why you've made some of the decisions you've made, why you've come to the conclusions you've come to. I can track now. I got it. And if I can get there with somebody and other people get there with other people, now you're having the ability to relax the dogmatism that arises within all of our instincts, and you can listen. And when you listen, it's sort of a magical thing, really. It's like when you're listening to everybody well, and you don't push an agenda or a decision or direction like impulsively. It's funny how wisdom seems to just surface. There's well I know what it is that we need to do here, and it comes from a place of greater peace, even if it requires courage because it's uncomfortable or scary. But there's still a sense of this feels right to me.
Yeah. Of all things, we've referenced Plato a handful of times, but courage is associated with the military class in the Republic, and their job is to elevate the wise and to defer. Yeah, the value of clever Twitter length responses in our culture is probably, this needs to get sidestepped. This is why I like hour and a half conversations
For sure.
as opposed. There's something about let's play out the ideas for a moment so that we can really get their body.
I think there actually is a resurgence of nuance. I think the 144 characters is sort of had its day. People are turning to some of the more long form things, at a higher percentage than they have in years. Long form blogs and writings and podcasts, and because I think there is a frustration with the oversimplification, and there's a desire for more nuance. There is a desire for more wisdom, but it doesn't surprise me that there's that they're going to compete a little bit for a while. That whenever the new mechanism is starting to have more of an influence, that there's there's a response against it. I see these things right now with like legacy media and even some of the people who are trying to do balanced news and some of these other formats like TikTok or whatever, but they're talking long form. And I saw this one TikTok news person who has worked at all these formats, and she was interviewed by a legacy media. And then she goes back and she says, here's all the things that when they aired this, they cut out of what I said. And here's the original that I gave you, and like how many more layers this gives, and how this wasn't an accurate representation of what I said. And because she has a wide enough following, that it did show a lot more of that nuance. And I like that kind of thing is happening, because I think that so much of the oversimplification, people are starting to call bullshit. And they're saying this just isn't enough. And I, for one, am actually hopeful because of that.
Agreed. I have 28 things about that, unfortunately. I have in Enneagram world, to circle back that, it's shocking to me how difficult it has been. I've spent about a year on it trying to pierce through short form Instagram, TikTok, and create content for those atmospheres. Yeah. And our following is like, we have 50 times as many people listening to a 1.5 hour podcast as we do those watching a 30-second clip.
Same. Yeah. And
maybe by the nature of it, things that are important need time dialogue, understanding. A lot of folks have wanted to comment on how this last election was very much influenced by long form podcast more than anything else, which again, shocking to me.
Well, there's also knowing yourself. Like, I think that's something that at this point I just accept about Joel and I, that we are better in an environment of long form than in these like short, pithy, like catchy images and flashy blah, blah, blah. And here's how do the 9 different types take their coffee? Like stuff like that is just not the way we're wired. It's not what we care about. So we're never going to be as successful in that realm because we are people who like to take something apart and look at it deeply. Because if we haven't, we feel a sense of incomplete or we haven't done our job.
Yep.
Yeah.
Takes energy to actually be an informed citizen, unfortunately, and an informed human being. Last question for me ends up being, as you're finishing this project, I imagine on your radar is, you know what, this is still the work that needs to be done on instincts. As you think through, like, what is next? What sort of topics kind of emerge in your mind as this still needs a lot of attention moving forward?
Yeah, for me anyways, there's, the whole thing of how they interact with each other. In what way does your first use the second, and how does it use the third? There seems to be a lot of, now we're learning so much with our recent round of certification students. We're having these in-depth conversations around the instincts, and many are seeing that, yes, they do function as a resource. My primary finds its expression through the secondary. That's how it does it. And so there's a lot of that's showing up. We're also, we're going to end up doing a course in a sort of a class through instincts, and really talking about healing through them, because so many people have ended up living out of their second or third instinct and have burned out and are not finding themselves thriving.
Yeah.
Others have told us that they don't know how to use their dominant instinct well, that it end up ruining some things in their lives. And so there's a sort of exiling of that and trying to function in something else. But that hasn't worked either. And so we're learning so much around the nature of their relationship to trauma, what happens there, and then also, in how you're using them as resources in ways that they're not functioning as best as they could. And the dynamic seems to be there's something really magical about the first two when they're functioning well and they're serving each other, where there is a thriving that takes place there. And so, again, this is all fresh, like brand new in the sense of like the last few months. That's about as old as it is.
Yeah.
So that we're still uncovering, and would love to have more conversations and with people to figure out what that looks like, and, do some more, and eventually put something out there that has a bit more of that as well in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, and for me, I had that jarring experience with my corporate certification students. So these are students that we're training to do the kinds of work that we do with organizations. And all of them had an idea of what their instinctual stack was. This is my dominant, my secondary, this is my tertiary. But then when we started looking at it through the lens of your strengths, like where are you at your best? Where do you really feel like yourself? Where would you describe you at your best, on your best day, really feeling like you're full of purpose? And they're like, well, I think I've done this actually more out of what I felt like I had to do.
Yep.
And if I actually ask it through that question, that actually changes my stack. And so I saw them like live change what they thought their stack was, because they're like, well, this is actually me when I'm thriving. And so I think there's a ton of work to do understanding how do we function when we're surviving, and how do we function when we're thriving, when we're really being the best version of ourselves. And I think there's a lot more exploration that is there.
That strikes me as very wise. And as I think back on my own story and career changes and the rest, there was one quote from your book, which I would love to highlight, that struck me as this is exactly what the value of a book like yours is, and pivoting based on your own, self-understanding. But you all write, when we're operating from our dominant instinct, we feel more effective and energized. However, when we try to function outside the primary instinct, we often feel less impactful and more drained. The word drained pierces for me.
Yeah.
And because I know what that world looks like. I know what it's like to have to amp up for something I'm just not, quote unquote, I'm not wired for. Whereas, like we've said this, I've probably cut it, but like this situation right here, me talking to you all, I could do this for 5 hours, had no problem getting up this morning, really energized to talk about a book that I enjoyed. And being able to identify that with language and really push your chips into it seems to be a real recipe, as was said, for thriving.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that too, because one of the things we're trying to articulate is like, what does it feel like to be acting within that instinct? Yeah. So we tell these long stories about a hunter, about a farmer, about a team, or in each of the chapters, because the idea is, what does it feel like? What do you feel like when you read that story? Do you just go, oh, that seems so foreign to me, or that stresses me out, or I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so inspired? Like, using words like drained, we have this visceral experience of like, oh, I know what that's like. And so much of what is powerful about the Enneagram types or about the instincts is when you hear something, you go, I know what that feels like.
Yeah.
I know what that's like. And I feel like that's when you start really touching on what's going to help you become you. The fully realized, where you are excited about your life, where you're excited about the things that you are putting your hands to. That's when I feel like we have also done our jobs in the world.
Yeah. How do you love? It's one of the questions I ask people. When you are at your best and you feel totally open-hearted to people, to the world around you, how do you express that love? And it is very instinctual.
They are Joel Hubbard and Jim Zartman. Incredibly grateful that you guys joined us again and took time off mic. I said I started doing work on an instincts book, and when I saw that you had something come out, I was like, oh, thank God, I don't need to fill that space. Like, because I knew intuitively that there's just this huge gap. I'm like, well, if nobody else is going to fill it, I'll throw something out. I'll probably sell some copies. But like, real wisdom and understanding needs to actually enter this space. If you guys, just to plug it again, Jim and Joel have done a huge service for the rest of us. If you get into Enneagram and want to get deeper into the instincts, they have done panels with each of the types and their dominant instinct. One of the things that's discovered in real time that I know you referenced is that sometimes you will see the stacks emerge in the conversations in real time, and you'll get a chance to say, oh, here's actually some of the variations that can take place. For TJ and I, we get itchy when Enneagram gets messy. When you say there's 54 types, this is hard to sell, but
right, no.
It definitely is.
But there's real wisdom in being able to go down those roads for a while, do some self-discovery. And I would highly, highly recommend a deep dive into their podcast feed for your type and for the type of those you love, as well as your book. I assume your book is available only on Amazon. Is that right?
Yeah, so it is. We have it in all 4 formats, though, so you can get a Kindle version of it, e-reader version of it. There's a paperback and hardback version. But then actually, as of last week, there's also the audiobook out for people who like to listen to podcasts and they're used to listening to our voices. The audiobook is out through Audible. So those are the formats that it is available right now.
Wonderful. Well, I'm looking forward to watching your guys' work develop and continuing to put out good content in the world for the rest of us. So I do appreciate you all. And I'm Jeff Cook. And who you aren't just isn't interesting.
So thank you so much for listening, and a big shout out to Jeff at Around the Circle for interviewing us and being a voice of wisdom in this world of the Enneagram and personal awareness and growth. We really appreciate you guys. And I put a link to their podcast in the show notes of this episode. If you haven't yet, take the new assessment for hunters, farmers, and teamers at the website, theartofgrowth.org. And you can also check out our brand new self-paced Enneagram Certification program. And if you have questions about that, you can reach out to Joel at theartofgrowth.org. And if you're interested in leading teams and teaching teams the Enneagram and the method we use to do that, you can reach out to me, Jim, at theartofgrowth.org to find out about our team's training certification. You can follow us on Instagram at just Art of Growth, and make sure you sign up for our newsletter to find out when good stuff is happening. Grace and growth, my friends. Until next time.